Okay, we want to welcome everyone to our Committee of the Whole meeting, Monday, July 15th in Council Chambers, and recognize that we're holding our meeting on the unceded territories of the Hoopachesit and Sechot First Nations. And we want to welcome and thank all of you for coming today. The train station is an incredibly important heritage building in our community, and we're excited to hear from the architect on it, and then excited to hear from all of you. And so for those of you who haven't been to a Committee of the Whole meeting before, the intent is not for us to make decisions. The intent is for us to hear from the public, ask questions ourselves, and really just gain some perspective before we even consider any options for moving forward or if we want to take any actions at all. So having all of you here today is a really important part of the process. So thanks to all of you for coming. To just give everyone an idea of what the structure of today's meeting will be, first, we will hear from our architect who's been reviewing the building, and then council will probably have some questions, and then there'll be an opportunity for public input. We'll try to get through input from whoever would like to speak. We probably will make sure everybody has spoken who wants to before anyone else comes up to speak a second time if we have time for that tonight. I think that's all we have. So with that, we have an agenda in front of us. Would somebody like to move approval? So moved. Second, Madam Mayor. All in favor? Carried. And we have minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting held at 3 p.m. on May 21st. Would somebody like to move adoption?
Move to adopt.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Any questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Okay. So on to delegations. The presentation for today is Revitalizing Uptown, the Future of the Port Alberni Train Station. And I'll turn it over to the CAO to give us a bit of background and make some introductions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council, I'm mindful that the majority of people in the room know more about the train station than I do, so I'll be careful not to make too many errors. So the city owns a train station and has, I believe, since the early 90s. And that the building was restored in the 90s, I believe, by volunteers from the Industrial Heritage Society. It is a building that is identified as a heritage building in the city by city bylaw. It is currently under lease to the McLean Mill Society, and that lease envisions that the Industrial Heritage Society is able to use that building for the purposes of meeting. So the lease to McLean Mill Society, at the time the council directed that it be leased to MMS. It was the intention that that building be sublet to somebody or multiple people that would bring some vibrancy and activity to the building. And in the process of MMS looking for a tenant, around the same time, the McLean Mill Society brought forward a potential tenant for the building, and we had another high-quality tenant contact the city. So we had two very good proponents, both of whom were interested. And before the city could move in a direction to consider maybe an RFP or something like that, or who might be the best proponent, we recognized that we didn't know enough about the building to begin to even consider having it redeveloped. And so. And we recognize that any proponent would have to undertake some work, would have to hire an architect likely and professionals to tell about what hazardous materials are there, what were the structural needs, what are the energy needs, that kind of thing. What are the potential, what's the potential for that site in that building? So staff interacted with council, and council supported staff recommendation that the city retain an architect to inform us on these things, and then that would also give us basically a base of knowledge that if council chose to go forward with a request for proposals, let's say, we would have some information then around what would be involved, and proponents would have some information around what they would be faced with if they were to try to repurpose that building. So that's hopefully a summary on how we got here. You'll recall that Joe Calenda, who was our in-house acting planner for a while, Joe introduced us to Will King at Waymark Architecture, and Will has been doing some work for us. The scope has crept a little bit. We started off looking at the structure of the train station, and it became evident that there were greater opportunities than just the building. There's the site opportunities and the general neighborhood opportunities. So I think you'll be very impressed with the presentation in terms of, it just causes us to stop and look at what that building and the site and the area can be. And I know that that Will is not wanting to make recommendations, but just to open our minds to some possibilities.
For sure. Fantastic. And just to note for the people in the back, there are a couple seats in the front still, just if anyone wants to sit. Okay, so with that, I think we are ready for Will's presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor, and to all of you here as well. It's an honor to make this presentation to you. I know that this part of town is dear to you, and again, you probably know more about it than we do, although we've been through the nooks and the crannies, but in terms of its presence and the way it works in the community, you have lived it and felt it and know its importance to you, certainly in a tangible way. Bear with me, I'm just going to grab my notes to correspond with the presentation. So, as Tim had mentioned, we were invited to come take a look at, oh, here we go. There's a train station right there, and that's the little building. And what we realized right away, of course, is that that whole neighborhood has the potential to be developed. In fact, even in this image, you can see that the housing development across the street is under construction. So there's stuff that's happening there all along. There's the green space in the hill aside, and I understand that there's RFPs in consideration for different proposals in that neighborhood, as well as all the development that's on the quay and in the harbor front. And it's certainly a very vibrant part of town. It could be more so, in my opinion, but I think it's a very key part of the downtown development of Port Alberni. So we were asked to look specifically at the building itself, and then to just expand, to look outside to see what can be done. And so we considered a lot of these, the types of things that would have to happen to this building, regardless of what kind of tenant you're looking for. So if you wanted to put a restaurant there, what do you have to do? If you want to put a school in there, what do you have to do? If you want to turn it into housing, what would you have to do? What are the types of things, and then what kind of things could you even think of to put in there? And so that's where we went with this proposal. So here's a closer view. In this case here, south would be to the right. So you can see in the summer day that the trees would shade part of that hill. And so we have Argyle Street right there. This is the top of the truck garage, as we call it. This is the train station there, and those are the tracks that run along the side. There's a parking lot along there. There's sort of empty space here and over there as well on both sides of the truck garage. But this little triangular piece is the lot of land that we're talking about. This is one of my favorite pictures. And this is what it would have been built as. So it's located in a historically important area that has in many ways exemplified the expansion of the European cultures into the forested areas of Western Canada. And while we all know, sort of the story of how white European culture came westward, and there's lots to be said about how that happened and the reconciliation required because of that. But this train station here is a very, it's an artifact of that time. And this is, in fact, where the cannons were fired. This is where the settlement happened. This is where that culture came to be in this part of the world. This train station, as an artifact of not only that expansion, but of the very place in which it happened, is something I think is very meaningful. And it's rare, I think, that you'd find such a potent, or more potent location for reconciliation anywhere in BC than in this very spot. And I don't mean to be an expert on reconciliation and all of the subtleties that go into that sort of aspect of civic culture and our responsibilities, but just enough to say that this is it's a very important location for lots of reasons, beyond which beyond the fact that it's a heritage building and it's an old version of these wonderful old train stations that I like. There are 3 different buildings on this site. This one here is the original train station. Right where that tree is, that was cut down and it was built into an extension that is there now. And then just to the right of that building in the 1950s was built a truck garage as the nature of transportation changed. And so while we think of it as one heritage building. It is actually, in fact, 3 different buildings. Well, and you can count the water tower, again, as a separate structure if you like. So we've completed a brief review of these buildings and studied their structural composition, their envelope systems, the general layout and planning, and the condition of the materials that were used and those that are currently in place. So the existing structure of the rail station, which is built around 1911, it's a board sheathed dimensional lumber roof, floor framing, it's wood stud walls. They're likely also board sheathed. There would be a concrete slab on grade. The existing foundations, probably shallow concrete grade beams, and you can see there's a bit of cracking, which means that it's probably unreinforced, but again, that's typical of the time. Seismically, it would only be in a range of about 10 to 30% of the capacity required for modern codes. It's, again, typical of buildings from early 1900s, and that's just what you start off with when you're working from. So there's problems in the building. This picture at the lower left is looking at the roof, and that bright light is the sky. So every time it rains, you can see that water comes in. This ceiling is in the upstairs portion of the train station, and it's not that particular thing is terribly problematic, but it's indicative of the fact that the building is leaking. It does constantly, I suspect, and it allows the fact that it's also very old and leaky to dry out. So for the last 100 years, the building has been leaking water and drying out. And every time a draft goes through the building, it actually saves it for another day so it can leak again and dry out again. Again, this is common of the type of buildings that were built in this time frame, and that's how a lot of them survived. It's really when we started to change the way that the building systems were working that we start to offer new problems to the building that weren't there before. So when we start to put insulation in certain areas but not others, when we add heating and ventilation equipment that creates moisture problems that weren't there before, those are the kind of things that can actually destroy a building. Just being leaky, it's terrible for your energy bills, but it doesn't actually destroy a building. This building's at risk because there's been several upgrades during its day that have actually put it at further risk than just the fact that it's old. So here's an example of some of the conditions that we found. I'm not sure if everybody can see what's going on here, but the large picture on the right-hand side is in the attic space. And what you're looking at there is the framing for the roof. At one point in the past, somebody had put down some bad insulation on the ceiling in order to keep some of the heat in the main space. But of course, it's not thorough, and you have there's actually nothing to keep the water out. Nor is there anything to keep the warm air in on the face below. So on all of those wood pieces, you can actually see water staining. Now, and again, that's not problematic in and of itself, except that it's indicative of a system of failure that is something that would need to be addressed. The smaller image on the right shows a new exhaust from a heating system that was put in there. The heating system is old and would need to be upgraded just as if nothing else was done. I mean, these heating systems are only intended to last 20 or 30 years. The building had been sprinklered, robustly sprinklered. I have to say that if there's anything that was done well in this building, they put in enough sprinklers to put out any fire. There's a lot there. So as I say, there's lots of evidence that some work had been done periodically to this building. For example, there's chimneys in the original one for wood-burning fireplaces. Those aren't there anymore. You can see that the windows on the front, upstairs and down below, have been changed. The siding has been updated. The building has been expanded. And so all of these updates that continually happen over the years are obviously done to try and maintain the building. When it comes to the way that our industry typically deals with heritage buildings these days, there's the idea of restoration, which is to bring a building back to what it was. There's preservation, which is what you can see in these old European fortresses, that they just will never rebuild them. They're meant to be as they are, and you just preserve them as such. And then there's rehabilitation, which is where you take these old buildings and you turn them into something new so that you give them another 100-year lifespan or more if you can. And so what we're talking about here is a rehabilitation of this train station. And as you can see, it has been undergoing this process for a long time. And so we're certainly not the first on the scene. You guys have been doing this for probably the last 100 years. And piece by piece, it has been expanding. And there's some things that were done well, some things that were not done well. But we're at the point now where we need to continue that process. The picture on the lower left is the interiors. The picture on the upper right, again, is the heating system. You can see there's an old window that was filled in. That's the only insulation on that wall, which always begs the question, like, what's the point? But, you know, it was probably a good idea at the time. The building, if you were going to do something new there, my suggestion would be to take the old washrooms, the old interior partitions, and strip it all out. You're at a point where this building requires enough of a seismic upgrade, enough of an envelope upgrade, that really trying to save the wainscoting is a lost cause. We're at the point now where the building needs some serious work, and it would need that if you wanted to put a bar in there. It would need that if you even wanted to put another new museum in there. Any sort of public occupancy where we're going to be bringing members of the public into a public building, we want to make sure they're safe, and there's a certain amount of things that are going to have to happen, which means, yeah, those interior partitions are just in the way. But that also gives you a lot of free rein to say you're going to offer a base building that is it's a neutral frame, so anybody who wants to put something in there has a carte blanche, so they can go in and turn it into a restaurant or a pub or a museum or a grocery store or anything that they want. You have the facilities available to them as soon as we start to remove those things. So I'll just mention the existing heating system. It appeared to be working, although again it's getting old and it needs to be replaced with something more efficient. There's also several rooms as you walked through that had musty smells, which means that you don't have ventilation in adequate amounts or in consistent amounts throughout the building. And again, this is not uncommon. It happens when we have a heating system that's designed to heat 5 rooms, and then we'll build 5 more rooms on later on, and it just wasn't designed to have that capacity. But those are the kind of things that would have to be upgraded. The truck garage, which is another interesting building. I know it's all part of the same thing, but I think of it entirely differently because it's built in a completely different way by completely different people for a completely different purpose. So this is the way that the transportation continued. And in the 1950s, of course, they weren't relying on rail travel. They had trucks. And so the trucks would be coming in here and unloading their gear. They built this structure in a fairly raw and bare bones kind of way, very much like a garage would have been built. So it's a metal deck, steel truss roof framing, and it has a concrete post and beam perimeter support, which is likely reinforced given its date, although I would guess that it's not highly reinforced. The existing building details are kind of short on detail. We did find a few of them, but it predates the earliest provincial building standard, but it was likely built to national building codes that came out in the early 1940s. And so it would have had at least some oversight to it. It would have been thoughtfully designed and engineered, only just to the standards of the day. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with this place. You should wander through it. It's fantastic, and all the little trucks and all the machinery that they have in there is delightful. What this is showing is the steel deck ceiling on the metal frame trusses, and the one in the lower corner there is showing the concrete columns, and there's brick infill in some places. So in order to deal with this building, we would likely have to upgrade the structural capacity of the connections, which means that those steel beams, the concrete beams and the steel joists would likely need to have additional steel supports that would connect the two so they don't rattle and fall apart in an earthquake. The existing roof framing is probably a bit undersized, although that could be easily reinforced, actually. The good thing about having this wide open is that you can get access in there to upgrade that structure without having to do any sort of destructive testing or other investigation, because it's just all right there in front of you. Since the building's heritage significance, the best opportunity to strengthen the lateral system would be to add new structure to the interior. In the short direction, you could include connecting steel trusses to concrete columns, new steel knee braces, add new steel moment frames in each bay, or adding new steel moment frames at each end of the building. These are ways that you can do improvements inside the building that'll hold it up in a modern earthquake. Now, unless the authority having jurisdiction, which means the building department, which means you, accept some practical relaxations, the building, in fact, this whole area would have to go under a brand new, complete structural upgrade to allow a public occupancy in there. And that would mean a robust seismic upgrade, and even more robust than you thought 2 years ago. They're pretty skookum now. However, with heritage buildings, we often deal with the realities of the building that's there, which means that we can't often do full upgrades. We have to do our best. And the building we could make easily better, although I don't think we could get it quite to those standards unless we were to do something far more significant. We talked a little bit about how we could add additional buildings outside and whether that would help anything. A common practice that you've seen in some area, I'm not sure if you've seen them, I see them in areas where they put big concrete, it's like big pillars on the sides of the building to keep them from rocking back and forth, but it's something that happens outside of the building. They do it in schools all over BC now. One thing that could happen here, though, is if there was another building that was built in the area, say in the parking lot, that you could then tie into, this new structure could be built to modern codes, and it could just touch the old one and hold it steady. That's a common thing to do. It's a slight touch on a heritage building, but it's something that offers modern structural stability to an existing heritage building without completely destroying the heritage building inside. The water tower is, it's one of my favorite things here. It's a wonderful little building, if you can call it that. And it illustrates some of the needs of the old trains, and it harkens back to the old days of Port Alberni's history. And so it currently doesn't serve any function, but it's part of the train station, and I'd love to think that we could incorporate that into whatever we're going to do here. Its inclusion in the future development would be a credit to us all. I think it's one of those great things that you don't see every day, and I haven't seen another one here on the island. So I think it's wonderful. Structurally speaking, it's timber, post and beam with timber bracing. The foundations are shallow concrete grade beams and are likely unreinforced. We require... Beg your pardon?
Reinforcement, not that shallow.
Is that right? Well, there you go. It may not meet the current building code requirements for new construction, but it looks like it's holding itself up fairly well. Some of the lower ends of the braces are starting to show signs of decay. You can see down in the lower left there some of the rot that's happening on those wood pieces, and that's certainly something that could just be tuned up. Replace a couple members here and there, but generally keep the structure as it is. The overall stability of the water tower has potential to be a weakness, and of course right now it's not full of water, and so that's something to keep in mind. But if we were ever to do something that would put a lot of weight back up in there, we would certainly have to think about how then to brace that additional load, the several tons that would be held up 10 feet in the air. So we did a summary of the kinds of things we would have to put into the building as sort of a basic upgrade to the structure and to the building envelope as well. And this was it's not meant to represent any particular part of the building, but just to kind of show a general idea of the kind of things that we would look to start to do. So on the floor, so down here, this would be the existing concrete slab, and we would recommend putting a layer of insulation, some lower level sheathing, and then a finished floor of likely a concrete topping above that, which would give a much better thermal rating of the floor and also increase a little bit of the stability there that you could tie some of the walls into. On the walls, right now, there's an existing framing system here which may or may not be insulated. We weren't sure. Inside the building, we would recommend putting a lateral seismic layer of structural sheathing. It's plywood, as we'd all know it. It just has a really bizarre kind of nailing pattern that has to go into it. We do the same thing on, beg your pardon, I lost my pointer. Oh, there it is. We do the same thing on the ceiling up there, where we put a layer of the plywood up on the ceiling joists, and this would deal with the seismic loads laterally from a roof diaphragm area. This blue layer here would be an air barrier that we could, if we were able to clear out the interior of the building, we'd actually be able to do a pretty good seal on it, which would be really important if we're going to actually try and do some thermal insulation in here. And again, a drop ceiling underneath. So we'd have new finishes on the inside of the building, but the outside of the building would remain untouched. So the entire process would be to take this old building, hollow out the inside, and fit a glove, I guess inside instead of outside, so that you would insulate the building, seal it all up, and give new finishes that would then allow for all the new systems to go in on top of that. So then we're looking at the type of opportunities that could come for this building, and whether those opportunities would change any of the initial thoughts that we had about the kinds of things that needed to happen here. And again, I like this picture just because there's like those kids playing on the side, waiting for the train to come, and those old wagons, and if only they knew where we'd be today. So we looked at some of the other places around BC, in fact around the world, and looked at some of the really interesting ways that industrial, waterfront, and historic places were able to develop from a pure industry-based or in some cases even dilapidated neighborhoods, and make them into vibrant areas that have a great deal of tourism, a great deal of markets, a great deal of people that bring vibrancy to the area. So Granville Island, I presume that many people have been there. It's a wonderful spot. It started off, of course, as an industrial piece of land that is still actually a working industrial area. And they've added a whole lot of things along the way. So they've added markets, housing, schools, a lot of other retail options for different types of merchants, for local and visiting shoppers as well, so that it's not gentrified by an income level, so that you can go there with no money, or you can go there and spend thousands. Relating to workshops and studios, which is another draw, so that you have local artisans that can afford to live and work in a single place. So there's a residential and a working aspect to this that helps create a lot of local residents who are well tuned to this place, and it keeps it bustling, keeps it busy. Another significant feature that came from the study of Granville Island is the inclusion of the multiple age groups. And so you have attractions for children, teenagers, young families, as well as the young singles, the older couples as well. And so there's the ability to draw in multiple age groups also prevents it from being gentrified by a particular time of day or a particular type of attraction. The kids market was created in '84, and that's like a 100-year-old building. And I'm not sure if you went through there, but I have little kids that love to play, and whenever we go to Vancouver, we can just hang out there. It's great. It also suits the adult population with pubs and restaurants and theaters and music venues, and so there's easy access to the rest of the town if you wanted to go on a night out. So key features that we wanted to look at here. Residentials, integration with 13 housing co-ops, 40 residential buildings. So that was key to bringing people to that area. The 25 market buildings with multiple interior real estate or interior retail spaces is what allows for a large variety of markets. So it's not a particular type of market or directed at a particular demographic. Of course, there's lots of farmers that go there, craftspeople, parks for children and adults, community centers, and bars and restaurants, and so on. Another one of the key features is that anybody who's been there knows how terrible it is to try and park, and it's because it's pedestrian focused. And the fact that it's pedestrian focused means that people are going slower and they're lingering in a place, and they're going there to be there, not to get through there. And that's something that you'll see as a feature of all these places that we studied. The Duncan Garage, someplace that is closer to home and in a smaller scale. But it's a really good example of how this heritage building, that was an old industrial building, was rehabilitated, and not to serve a single occupant, but it was rehabilitated to provide a variety of areas for different people to come in and do what they want to with it. And so because of that, you were able to have a lot of different types of draws to the area, and a lot more than a single type of patron, more than one type of tenant. And so you have a lot of different people invested into this area, which gives it a larger breadth and a larger importance into the neighborhood. The farmers market in Duncan, another great thing that is close to home. I believe this is one of the largest farmers markets in BC. And again, this is something that pops up and it goes year round, so it's not simply a summer thing, but it's something that happens a lot, and it brings a draw to that area constantly. And this is just the ability to have a place where people can wander and walk, be leisurely about their day, and have access to all of these markets. So again, similarities here, that you have these historic industrial buildings that are repurposed to support gathering spaces and a lot of community events, as well as commercial and retail. But it's not ever a single focused, it's multiple small scale vendors focused. And so it offers a lot to many people, not a single good tenant to lots of good tenants. The public amenities for children and adults as well. So it's again, it deals with it's an attraction to a multiple type of demographic, and because it's a year round, it's not simply a tourist attraction in the summer, but it's something that the local people are drawn to all year round. Pike Place in Seattle is a much larger scale, but the reason we want to show this one is that the city developed a process. It's a nonprofit wing directed by the city that took all of these heritage buildings that were falling down and refurbished them. And in order to bring people there, they started these markets, and the market grew and grew and grew as the attraction, and that allowed the city to develop all the other buildings around it, so that it becomes a hub for low-income housing, a lot of the social infrastructure that's there, like Medicare and things like that. So there's 500 residents who live in 8 different buildings throughout the market, and these accommodations support a variety of income levels and family types, and as such has become a significant provider of low-income housing and social services. So included in the areas of medical clinic, senior center, food bank, childcare, preschools as well. And so all of that stuff can happen based around all of these market elements. And so it's kind of like one thing perpetuates the other. Again, key features to note, you have these wonderful historic industrial buildings repurposed to support public gathering spaces. The market areas are surrounded by housing, medical centers. There's multiple small-scale vendors year-round, and some public amenities for multiple age groups, and again, it's pedestrian-focused. If any of you have been to Calgary, the East Village in Calgary was a pretty dismal part of the world about 10 years ago and has since been developed. Now this is at a massive scale. This development is not something that would even fit in Port Alberni. But again, I wanted to bring this about because the city of Calgary was looking at a part of their neighborhood that needed to be rejuvenated. And so there is a number of old heritage industrial buildings that people would want to go and find tenants for, but in doing so they also updated their infrastructure for their park systems and their transit systems to incorporate all of that. They've gone above and beyond now and developed some libraries, that wonderful music center, and some massive developments as well. But all of that was part of the city's effort to take a part of town that was falling down and develop a plan for it, understand the types of tenants that are going to bring people there, the type of residences that they're going to need to support their housing population, the types of park systems, infrastructure, and so on that all have to get tied together in order to make this place happen. So they have these historic landmarks, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Calgary, but it's a wonderful city with an old history as well. And this was a significant industrial area, and it was on hard times when they decided to fix it up. So they took this mix of new buildings and heritage retrofits. So it wasn't all just heritage buildings. They put some deliberate new infrastructure in there, and they had RFPs that would go out for developers to develop housing projects in certain areas that would then support all of this. There's a lot of restaurants, coffee shops, entertainment, a lot of retail, but the community spaces and the civic direction that the city took there, I think, is very significant as well. The Meatpacking District in New York is another great story of old industrial areas that have been repurposed and offered back to the public. This is an elevated train that has become a wonderful public park and gardens. The catalyst that truly transformed that neighborhood was the opening of the first part of the High Line Park in 2009. And so once the public were able to get in there and see that, then the shops started coming back, and then you start seeing galleries, then you start seeing pubs, and it was about bringing people into this place, and not on their cars. It was offering it up as a park in a pedestrian-oriented neighborhoods. Now it's what Soho used to be. It's the coolest part of North America, really. Camden Market in London, again, a different city, but the reason I wanted to mention this one here is because this area was based on some industrial buildings that were using the canals as their industry base. And when they were all falling apart and the city wasn't sure really what to do with it, they opened up a public market, like a farmer's market, just as something to do there before we tear it all down. The market became so popular and so many people started coming there just to go to these markets. As it turned out, you weren't allowed to have any shops open on Sundays except for this one. And so every weekend, this place was the place to be. And so once people started coming to these markets, then there became a lot of interest in saving a lot of these buildings. And so the heritage buildings then became rejuvenated because of the people that were brought there. Again, it's part of a long-term redevelopment plan now, and now that London knows what they have, they're certainly not going to let it go, but it was one of those things that happened by accident. But again, historic landmarks, historically significant industrial buildings, a mix of new and old when they're retrofits, a lot of variety that went into these places, and pedestrian-oriented. So I'm sure you're starting to see a theme of all these places that we keep coming across. So we've divided this up into 8 kind of categories where we have your social aspect, your eating, your dining, your drinking. There's the transportation, so whether you're driving, you're stopping, you're walking. There's what you have, and not everybody has, is this attachment to the sea. So you have a whole other dimension of recreation and transportation that is available to us. There's always the nature of parks and common space. There's theater entertainment, which is important everywhere you go. All of these places have an aspect of that as well. There's a bit of tourism that comes into it. So with your shops and your commercial aspect, there's a fair amount of attraction to outsiders that want to come and visit. As well, you need to have people who want to live there, people who can work there. There's industrial and commercial aspects are obviously key as well. And so it's a combination of all these things that lead to the success of these other places. So when it comes to how we want to do this in Port Alberni, we're looking at, okay, commercial and industrial things. What kind of things can we do with the commercial industrial nature of this neighborhood? Not simply the train station or the truck garage, but that whole area, of course, is built out of commercial and industrial buildings. And in fact, most of Port Alberni has this great industrial infrastructure that has been the bread and butter of this community for 100 years. And these are the kind of things that can bring a vibrancy that will attract people from all over the world. And so celebrating the industry is very key, I think, especially here in Port Alberni. So transportation, of course, is what creates the train station in itself. These 2 examples that we're showing here are images of the way that different cities have dealt with the interaction between pedestrians and car traffic, which has been a problem ever since we had cars. But there are different ways to do that. So the one on the bottom left is in LA, and It's a type of crosswalk where you can go diagonal and all the traffic stops at once and all the people go at once, and it's a big brouhaha, but it's really fun. And so a lot of people are there, and you end up having a much safer pedestrian experience because all the cars have to stop in all the directions at once. The next slide over there is a bit of a park or a public square that's right off the traffic, so traffic can come in and around it, but the body of the land is actually all for pedestrian access, so the cars have to circumvent the residential area. So, as I mentioned, Port Alberni has the significant ties to the land and the forest, but connections to the ocean. Of course, you are a federal port. There's not even very many of them in Canada, and you are one. I'm from Victoria, and we're not a federal port. We're a lowly provincial port. The industrial components related to fishing and shipping are key to Port Alberni's identity, and the relationship that with Port Alberni Port Authority demonstrates national interest. Beyond the industrial and commercial interests of the shoreline, there are recreational uses like kayaking, sport fishing, pleasure boating that make Port Alberni a great place to live. So I don't live here, but you can come here and you can go mountain biking, you can go kayaking, and even people from all over Vancouver Island can come and enjoy Port Alberni for these things. It's also our particular location being right next to the quay is an important thing to consider as well, because there's that development that's right there just at the waterfront, just across the street from where the train station location is. And I think it'd be in everyone's benefit to try and tie those two sides of the street together to create a larger neighborhood. Outdoor space and urban parks. These are two. The one on the lower left is in Seattle. The one on the larger upper right is from Vancouver. Both of them are urban parks within industrial settings. And the wonderful thing about that is that you can still have industry surrounded by parks or parks surrounded by industry. They don't have to be separated into different parts of town. There's that green space that's right across from the train station that is not yet a park, but is certainly part of the public recognition of that area. It's an important, I'm sure it's important to everybody here, and what to do with that land and how to address that green space is something that I don't think should be left out of the conversation when we talk about the train station and what to do on that piece of land right there. So in arts and entertainment, of course, all these wonderful things you can do when you have a park, when you have public space at all. Everything from demonstrating local crafts to competitions, to concerts, to Canada Day celebrations, to celebrations of any kind. All of these things can happen once we start to dedicate certain parts of our public places to park space and squares. So Port Alberni could use the real estate in the train station lot and the surrounding areas to create similar places that could serve to celebrate the local arts community. Events and art installations that offer a glimpse of the cultures making up the Port Alberni community could demonstrate a recognition of the local histories and acceptance of our similarities and differences, celebrate local skills and inventiveness of the craftspeople, showcase the community to visitors from all over. Food and drink, which is what brought me to Calgary's East Side, because they have just wonderful restaurants there. These are the kind of things that are in vogue now, I have to say. But taking industrial spaces and turning them into the best five-star restaurants in the world is something that's happening in cities all over. You have this wonderful building. I'm not sure how many people here need to go find five-star restaurants, but even the kind of pubs and facilities like that are always an attraction to public places. The interesting thing is that the best examples all happen when they're part of a larger development that has a lot of public space around it. And so they're not isolated in certain areas, and so you don't have to go out of your way to find these places. They happen to be right there next to the place that you're walking your dog or playing with your kids. And so it becomes part of a community, not separated or the focus of the community. When it comes to living and working, this is also something really important to do in the same place. The upper right is a development that's going up in in Victoria, in the James Bay neighborhood, which is a dense neighborhood full of a lot of working places, parks. Buildings about that size are very common there. You can see across in the lower left-hand side the way that parks and buildings are integrated together. Those are also live-work buildings, so that they're zoned in a way that you can have a residence, but you could also have a shop. They could be artist studios. You could sell furniture out of your front door if you wanted to do that, if it's something that you made. These are the kind of things that allow that type of entrepreneur and artisan to live and work in a single place, which makes it a very attractive place for young people, especially who are starting out, but even just an attractive place to offer the possibilities to the people. So it's not something that we're prescribing. We're saying, do whatever you want here. It's only as wide as your imagination. And those kind of spaces are rare. And if we could find a way to do that in Port Alberni, I think you would have something be really helpful. So everybody likes goats on the roof. I can't go by without stopping, at least for ice cream. And it's one of these fun things about having a destination I don't need to buy ice cream, but well, why wouldn't I? It's just a fun place to go. And it's because it's just off the road. You can get out, you can walk around, you can be there in the environment. There's a lot of different age groups there. There's a few things to buy, a number of different shops. There's some art to look at. There's a goat on the roof, which is an attraction of itself. But it's one of those things that creates a community that brings people to it. And so crowds invite more crowds. So having things like markets is just a wonderful thing to add to a town. And we might not be able to do it 7 days a week, 12 months of the year. But even the more that we can create places that people want to gather, it creates a vibrancy. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Not that we need goats on the roof, but we're trying to bring people to a place that they want to be and want to make a point to come and to stop into. So how do we fit all of this onto your little train station? That was the big question. So we realized that in order to fit all of this onto that little site, we'd have to look at a multifaceted approach to what the development could be. So looking at not simply a single tenant, but how you could take that lot and develop that into a multi-tenant type of facility. So, and again, the key to the successes of all of those previous examples was that they had so many different types of things that were all brought into the same place. So the other thing, of course, is that part of what makes each of those places unique is the way they were developed over time. And while it is easy for me to draw up whatever my imagination can come up with, the real answer is going to be for the city to provide a palette or a canvas that the rest of Port Alberni can develop with their own means, their own ideas, and to create what is going to be Port Alberni's answer in a place like this. So it's about making the best of our possibilities so that that can happen organically. So we looked at some of the biggest things that would have to happen. We looked at residential space. So you can see that there's some residential buildings already there. We looked at what it would take to build one. So you can see I drew a red box and put a tree on it. It doesn't have to look like that. But in that little area, that is a parking lot right now that used to be there for trucks to access that garage. Now, we don't need to have trucks accessing that garage. So in theory, that could become the base for a residential building. That just means that we're bringing more people to that area, and we're bringing them there with specific purpose. And the idea, of course, is to bring people into an area that offers a lot of these different types of commodities to keep them there. So suitable development in a spot like that could also house street-level retail space. That's the way many larger communities do it, where you have 4- or 5-story buildings, but it's on the street level. It's all commercial space, retail space. It could also be space for a college or offices, the type of workspaces and schooling that people will need to have in the area as well. Larger buildings might also consider space at the street level for a small library, child minding, child care centers, community rooms. Those types of facilities are almost always needed in in neighborhoods. And once you start looking at the possibilities for development, you realize that if you're going to build something there, we could just have that too. So commercial space is something that you are well suited to. What we've shown here in these two circles, right there are two areas. This one here is on the street. I just had tacos right there just today. These spaces here are already waiting for this stuff to happen. You can see even coming up and down Argyle Street from the center of downtown above, down from the quay below, the traffic is already, it doesn't stop there because there's not that much reason to, aside from the parking spots. But there's the opportunity to develop commercial space there that could be a focus for that neighborhood. So we could have pubs, restaurants, or a more civic-minded space like a library. Again, the daycare community space, a combination of them. We could also have grocery stores. There isn't a little grocery store nearby, but something like a Red Barn is a type of a grocery chain that would fit well into a building like that. I don't know anybody from Red Barn, but I'm just imagining. The truck garage portion of the building could remain integrated with the train station, and the tenant could be there, or it could become a separate tenant. So the truck garage part could become a different tenant that would have more of an indoor-outdoor environment, whereas the train station could become a more robust interior environment. As it would be difficult to heat the truck station, you could use that part to something like the rain-covered portion of the street market that could then open up into the parking lot beyond. That would be a good use that would allow it to be uninsulated, and you wouldn't have to do very much to the truck garage portion in order to create that type of a space. Public space is what we all saw right away when we were here. So again, the public space of the street itself, the public space of the hill, and that, I'm going to call it a park. I know it's not a park, but it seems very park-like. Up the hill there, that is this wonderful green space that opens up onto that hill. It's not used in that way yet, but it seemed like the obvious answer was to make some sort of integration between the public space of the street and the forested area of that hill. Again, this is where your water tower becomes this little public thing that's in the middle of wherever. You can see on the drawing to the left what I've drawn there, and this was just us kind of joking around a bit, but just to see what would happen if we built a little bridge from the corner that would go up onto the roof of the truck garage. And maybe the roof of the truck garage is actually the deck for a restaurant that's in a public building that also has housing on the side. So that would be right there. So you could imagine walking down the street and walking onto the roof of the garage to see a farmer's market below, your kids playing down here. The street would be full of people shopping. You could have a park access as well, and there'd be residences, perhaps schools, museums, galleries. The train station could be a wonderful restaurant, it could be a daycare, it could be a grocery store, it could be any one of those things. But you have the ability now to rethink the way that we access the site and what we could possibly do there. I'd love to have a little bridge and go hang it on the roof. Oh, it's a green roof now. We might have to change that to make it a less green roof. Play space. This is one of my favorite water parks. This one's in Beacon Hill, and this is what I thought of when I first saw that water tower. And so this big watering can spreads water for all the kids and grown-ups who dare get wet. If you were to look at that spot right there and say, what are we going to do with that water tower? It's just such a playful element that I couldn't imagine not having some sort of attraction for children. Then of course you have the connection to the park that's just, it's 50 feet away. And making that connection available for children to play in the woods, on the hill, in the trees, and really experience that the natural landscape of Port Alberni mixed in with this wonderful playful element that also has really deep historic significance to the area, I think would be a very rich and meaningful connection between multiple cultures and time frames that existed here in Port Alberni. The pedestrian space is something that, again, was key this whole time. So when we looked at this area, one of the first things that we thought would be a really fun idea is to take and block off traffic from this small little spot so that you could have a pedestrian-focused connection between the hill over here and all of this space right there. Now, there's already a whole lot of traffic that flows along these streets and up here as well. There's connection down here, and so we wouldn't want to become a hindrance to the way that the city maneuvers. But allowing an area right in here that could be pedestrian only means that you have a place to become slower, and you can get out of your car, you can be in an area, you can visit multiple different locations for different reasons at different times of the day and at different times of the year, and that area could always remain useful and popular. Now, one thing that the city of Vancouver did, that's what that image is down on the lower left, is Robson Square, if you don't know it. It started off as pedestrian only for just a few times a year. And then it became so popular that people realized that there's just no point putting cars back in there for a few times a year, because there were so many great things about having a small block, just one block, that cars couldn't go on. So all the pedestrians could get off the sidewalks and spread open into these squares and these wonderful spaces. And from that, of course, you have all kinds of other things that culminate there. So you have performances there, you have small pop-up vendors that happen there, and all of these things are an organic response to the fact that people can get out of their cars and spend time in the city without being on a sidewalk. Now, on top of that, one of the things that Calgary did, which was it was a lot, but they're developing trail systems, boulevard plantings, new types of trams and public transit. Now, that might not all be in the cards for Port Alberni, but I think what we can see is when we look at the way that these transportation systems work, if we were going to develop boulevard planting along this street or even up and down the hill on Argyle, you'd have the ability to tie in the parks that are focused in that area into a much wider breadth. And so then you can take the efforts from one local part of the town and spread that out beyond just those 2 blocks. But you could go all the way up the hill to City Hall, you could go all the way down to the Quay, you could go all the way over to both ends of the tracks as far as your budget would allow. But it means that you have a connection through larger areas that can still have a focus. But it's the ability to have an expansion of this idea far beyond just the simple site. This is a drawing I did just showing the top. So again, here's the Quay down here. This is the train station right there. This is the truck garage. There's my little bridge. That's my little building that I put with the green roof on it. Blocked off the street, so the little taco shop now can open up into this plaza. I built a little amphitheater down there so you could watch plays or musicians by sitting on the side of the hill. All of these kind of things, these are just my ideas. And we talked about, I say my ideas, they're from everybody in our office, I'll just take credit. But this was our response to what the site could provide. So when we were looking at that one little train station and thought, how are we going to upgrade this building to provide something more useful to the city? Again, the first thing that we realized is that we can't have a single use or a single reason to do this, that the place is just too important, that the value of this location is such that it should include a much larger view. And in doing so, of course, that means that you get a much bigger engagement with your community. So you're not just looking at trying to find one pub tenant to work out at the train station, but you're trying to find multiple tenants or multiple ways to develop this property. So we looked at some of those other spots to say, like, how did Pike Place happen? How did Granville Island happen? How did Calgary's East Side happen? These are, I mean, even for Calgary, that development is much larger than a normal budget would allow. So there's a couple things that are really important questions to ask. So right now, the city owns it. If you want to maintain ownership, you got to pay for it, but you maintain control. And so there's a give and a take with that. So this amount of development would be, hundreds of millions of dollars to do all those things I drew. Now, you wouldn't have to do it all at once, and certainly you wouldn't be able to do it all at once. But the idea of ownership is something that the city has to grapple with. So if you wanted to sell off the building, you could do it in a bunch of different ways. You could subdivide it, for instance, and not sell off the entire property, maybe just a portion. The types of bylaws that could be put in place that would save the train station from greedy developers and unfettered development, as I call it. But you want to maintain some sort of control. So even if you were to divest of the asset in one form or another, there are ways that you can maintain control over what kind of development can happen there. There's other things that the city would never sell, like the street. And so how you deal with that street could then lend itself to the types of development that would be welcomed there, that would then develop alongside it. So trying to find different ways that you can take the assets that you have, maybe divest of some, maybe not, but work with them to find a way that would provide the momentum that wouldn't just be public money to do this. And so in all of these other developments, there is some public money, but that public money was what created an impetus for private investment. And the best part of these communities are all when you have entrepreneurs that can go in there and find a great idea and invest their own money, their own energy, and create something wonderful. And everybody else can just stand back and watch it happen. And that's where the best neighborhoods happen. So again, things for you guys to consider, of course, is the type of ownership that you want to maintain or not, the type of zoning that we're going to allow there. These are, again, it's all within your jurisdiction to deal with. Again, the green space, does that become public park or does that become part of another development? These are questions that you guys will need to answer. Granville Island, as it turns out, got a whole lot of federal money. Look at that, Canada right there. So it's labeled right on the front. That's who paid for it. The federal government came in and they put a lot of money. They made that public market, and that was the big thing that they did, was to make the big public market building, develop the roads, some of the infrastructure. But then, of course, what followed is the big Emily Carr University that moved in there. A whole bunch of different residential development happened. And so the public money that was invested becomes a very good investment in that it spurred a whole lot of private investment to follow. Farmers market, or the Pike Place Market, which is in the lower left, was a slightly different story. They had a little bit of federal funding from the U.S., but most of it came from the city. And what they did is they developed a PDA. It's the Pike Place Market Development Authority is what they call it. So the PDA is it's a group that the city created that is full of, I think there's 12. And check my note, there's a 12-member volunteer council, 4 of which are appointed by the mayor, 4 appointed by the current council, and 4 are by the market constituencies, so the vendors that live and work there. And that group of directors then governs what's going to happen in the market itself. And so it's not simply well-meaning volunteers who are going to, get together on a Tuesday night and develop this. This is highly qualified and skilled people who are in the business and are well-educated developers and who know how to deal with the communities on a large scale. And they're appointed there by the city, and they are funded by the city to do this kind of developments. And so then the development has to be self-sustaining. That's part of how it works. And so in order to provide a lot of the social housing and the community aspects of it, they have to get enough rents from their tenants, and they have to have enough people coming to have enough retail and income in the area to do that. But again, it's with a bit of public money and a bit of public investment that they're able to attract a whole lot of private investment and private money that then creates a perpetual motion machine, is what I call it, and it just keeps it helps itself be what it is. This is Calgary. And again, what Calgary did, and again, this is a neighborhood that's a monstrous size. So, so way up there is where it starts, and it's this whole neighborhood, and it keeps going. They did something very similar. Similar to Seattle's venture, the Calgary City Council approved the formation of a wholly owned subsidiary, which is the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. And their job was to maintain the development of this massive land resource in the downtown core. And so then they set up a Rivers District Community Revitalization Levy, which is how they got their money, and authorized $276 million for the first project. And then additional revenue they got by selling off pieces of that. So it's not like they kept everything. They offered a lot of this to private development, and it's how they were able to then get new buildings to mix in with some of the old. Some of the old buildings were sold off, some of them were kept. But having the right mix and knowing which pieces of property you can give to a developer with the right type of RFP guidelines to have some sort of control over what the development's going to do allowed them to get enough money to do the rest of the project around it. And so again, it's using a little bit of public funds and experience and effort, and then allow a lot of the private investment to follow in behind. So where to go next? So here's my little sketch, the little building with a tree on it. I think the next thing that what you really need to do is think about how you want to maintain or not maintain control over this asset. And I hope that you'll agree with me that it's a wonderful asset. I was really impressed the more I studied this with the context of the city that it's in and the history of the place, the richness of this wonderful area. And there's a heritage building, which means that there's something physical there, but to me it's much larger than that, and I think its importance to the community would suggest that it's much more than just a two-story building made out of wood. It's something critical to the way that the Port Alberni is and what it could be. So I think a lot of the consideration for you and council is to decide how you want to go about looking at this and the type of opportunities that you think are viable, the type of opportunities that you think you want to discuss, and so again, I'm not offering the answers. These are suggestions, and these are the things that came to mind when we studied the project. And so at that, I would like to offer up some time for questions.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation to see, and I want to really thank you for the work that you and your team have put into this. It is, I think it's easy to take for granted what we have in our community. It's always exciting to see someone who's not from here come in and really see the potential that we have. So thank you.
Good.
Are there questions from council first? Councillor Poon?
I'll just comment. I think you've taken a really great approach to illustrating the potential that we have in our community, and I'm really excited to see what we end up going for.
Yes, me too.
Thank you. And we'll get to public questions and comments once we finish council. So I do see you there, Peter. Councillor Corbeil.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. King. That was a great presentation. The one, whether it's a question or concern that I have, most of the areas you showed us were fairly large communities, with the exception of Duncan, and I just wonder, do you feel that Port Alberni is large enough to take on some of these projects that you've identified?
Yes, absolutely. There's a very new project, and I wasn't able to just show this because I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to show yet, but if you're familiar with the Esquimalt, which is not a large community, it's one of the 13 that call themselves Victoria, they put out an RFP to get a new library. They wanted a new library, they wanted a new town hall, they wanted a whole bunch of these things, and they didn't know how to do it. And so they put out an RFP that offered a certain piece of land and a density to a development company, and in turn, the development company had to build all of these things into their development. And so, whether it's the right reason or the wrong reason or the I don't know yet. It hasn't been finished, and I don't know whether it's going to be awesome or if it's going to be awful. But the point is, they looked at what they had and what they needed, and they found a way to do that. And it didn't cost them anything more than the assets that they already had at the table. And so Port Alberni is certainly able to do something. You're not going to build a SkyTrain station there, and there'd be no need to. The development on the size, the scale of Calgary was shown just to illustrate that even monumental things can be done if you think about it in a very holistic way, and then look at the assets at your disposal and leverage those assets to find the right answers. Now, Calgary has more money than we have, they have more people than we have, but they also have a bigger problem than we have. it's just a different scale. It's the same type of solution.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Solda?
Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed that. I actually had some neat ideas, and I was discussing it with other people, but this was amazing.
Wonderful.
And it's interesting because I actually saw an old train station when I was at the FCM years ago in Saskatoon. And they had, I went in this tour, walking tour of the city, and the city manager turned around and said, "This is our train station." I had to turn around and take a look at it. It was a mall. By the time it was done, it was amazing. So the biggest thing will be interesting if whatever we decide, how do we afford it? And I'm quite concerned about some of the serious issues that you brought up with the building. I didn't realize it was in that kind of state, and that concerns me. So
Yeah,
that'll be.
And on that note, I think one of the first things that we saw is that doing nothing isn't really an option.
Exactly.
You have to do something.
But I do have a question regarding earthquaking and making it proof. All these years it's been there, right?
That's
And
right.
we've had earthquakes and
That's right.
tremors, and it stood its
Yes.
course, right?
That's right.
So
Yes. So time's
obvious.
ticking.
Yeah. Obviously, it stood its time.
That's
is
right.
what
Let's-
I'm saying.
We
That's
don't
not
want to
real
lose
wood.
it when the time comes. Councillor Paulson?
Great presentation, and thank you very much. And I think it's, for me anyway, it's great to have you come in and looking from different eyes, because sometimes you drive by there and you
Oh,
don't,
all the
you don't
time.
even look at it.
Yes.
You know, and for us, I think that we're looking at a broader picture as well. It's not just a train station; it's the linchpin, and it's right at the entrance. But you know, we've been kicking around some thoughts about how to freshen up Harbor Key, and
Yeah.
you know, once again, it's a long-range plan, but this certainly took me out of my narrow blinders and actually opened up the possibilities. And I think it's exciting, and
Wonderful.
you know, and a chance to preserve a heritage building that if we don't take care of it, we're in danger of losing it, I think,
That's right.
based on what we saw. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Haggard?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if anybody in the audience or in council has been to the garage in Duncan, but it's called the garage because it really was an old garage. And when you go inside, it's just amazing. It has a vegetarian restaurant, it's got an organics market, it's got a couple of retail spaces, and it's got retail spaces upstairs. And I could totally see something like that in our train station. So if you do get an opportunity to drive through Duncan, just stop by and go in and have a look. I think you'll be really impressed and see how we can do something that's very similar. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Washington?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, Mr. King, thank you for your talk. Being last, all the good questions are obviously gone, but any idea of cost?
No idea of cost.
No idea.
No idea of cost. No.
You're playing it safe.
Yeah. No. And of course, IJU, I think, is about a 5-story building, and did some upgrades on some other parts. I mean, I could imagine a cost for a 5-story building, but it's not.
My biggest concern
Yeah.
would be how could we go inside the train station and, like you say, do it from the inside out so
Yeah.
nobody even knows it's been done, so that we could retain
Well,
the
that's right.
historic
And-
value.
And the reason I can't answer something like that, I mean, you could study it, but the problem is that you'd have to have a design for what you want it to do. So if you want it to be a grocery store, that's one set of conditions. If you want it to be, a daycare, it's a different set of conditions. And so, once we can decide the type of thing that we want in there, for instance, offices are a different type of occupancy. For those who are familiar with the building bylaws, an office in a retail store is different than a daycare, it's different than a school, it's different than a restaurant. And so there's all these different types of things that would dictate what has to go into that building. And so you kind of have to think about a lot of it to figure out what version you're going to look at in detail.
But it can't handle an upgrade.
Well, you could do it. Yeah, if you were to do that on its own, it would be the most expensive because you wouldn't have the benefits of adding all these other parts and pieces to it.
And something to hold on to it.
Well, yeah. So my little building is holding it steady from the side. Again, that's an idea. I don't know if that's the right idea or not. It was just something that we thought and talked about in our office and thought, well, if you were to build something new there, you could do lots of cool things and still keep the building. That's just one possibility. Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. At this time, we'll open it up to public questions and comments. So I anticipate probably many of you are here to speak today, and we want to get through as many of you as possible. So when you are welcome to the front, if you could please state your name and your address just so that we can take them down for the record. And I will ask you to try to keep your comments reasonably brief so that we can allow time for as many people who are here to speak today as possible to have an opportunity. And I'm going to call up Mr. Rushman first because I saw his hand up first.
You want me to come up front? Sure.
Yes. And yes, everyone will have to come up to the speaker because we are live streaming today. So just at this, at the microphone right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Pete Bushman. I live on 3615 6th Avenue. I've been in town since 1976. I like this place. And one of my comments that I had in regards of making developments and doing stuff, I'm not a backward thinking person, but we have a multicultural society here, and we don't want to change the look of our town and get it into high-rise apartment blocks, because I talk to a lot of people that go on holidays and doing stuff like this. And just to give you an example, the Yellow Point Lodge, that guy will never change the structure of the place, and it's always packed with people because they like to see something classy, not a 5-story building sitting on the harbor and having multi-development stuff. And with the marketplace that we can do, with all the people that we have here, not a problem at all. We have lots of native people that can set up and not only do the artwork, but can also do foods and things like this, which the culture that we get out of Europe is mostly from Holland, Germany, Denmark, and northern, like Finland and Sweden and stuff like that. That's right. Yeah. Anyway, and they enjoy these kind of things, as far as I'm concerned. And we work towards this, and everybody's there. And if we make a development of any kind, and anybody's going to come up with comments and stuff, the first thing they should do, they should ask the public and what we think and what we want to do as a unit. And that is very important. Okay? That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll just ask if everyone can address council. It helps with being able to hear on the microphone. We want to make sure that people watching on the live stream are able to hear the comments and questions that are being asked as well. Who would like to speak next? In back.
Hi, I'm Nancy Blair, 10272 Sterling Arm Crescent, and I'm here tonight representing the Community Arts Council. We've been discussing and working on a proposal to present to Council for some time now regarding utilizing the train station as an arts hub. Our idea is to bring together all the arts groups in the community in order to operate a social enterprise that would provide working spaces for artists in an open studio format, and would attract and be easily accessible to tourists and residents as well. So given the activity around the cruise ships and the reconciliation mural that would be done next year, and the proximity to Harbor Quay as a magnet for tourists and locals, an arts-related use of the train station would breathe life into this historic venue and provide year-round activity and economic opportunities. As well, the Arts Council is keen to acquire additional gallery space that would enable us to display paintings and artworks from our permanent art collection. At the moment, we have no place to do that, so it's all in storage. We see utilizing the train station as a possible extension of the Roland Arts Center, thereby anchoring spaces for the arts, both at the start of the arts district and at the finish of it. So our proposal is just still really preliminary, but we'd like the chance to be considered and to bring it forward to council for consideration. We do not recall an open request for proposals for the train station, but we hope that one will happen so that everybody can have an opportunity to present. And we'd love to be heard on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Okay, come on forward, Wayne.
Worst thing for me is sitting down too long.
Good evening, Your Worship. Wayne Oliver, 4360 Morton Street. One of the things that I was just thinking about tonight, we have a rather unique position. We are the only seaport in North America that does not have rail access, although that infrastructure is there. And I would really urge council, before they make too many decisions in the area around there, to keep that in mind, that there is always that possibility of a vibrant rail operation again. And the other thing I would like to ask council to do would be to put out a request for proposals for the operation of the steam train, the station, or I think that should be in private hands and run by competent operators. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm assuming all of you are not here to not speak. Come on forward, Hugh. People are very patient waiting today. We don't always get this.
My name is Hugh Grist, 6158 Strathcona Street. Firstly, I'm upset we're not talking about a train station having trains. We want to make sure that still happens. I want to make sure council still believes in that. But a little upset with the depth of the survey done on the building. That building was rebuilt in 1990. It's not that old. It hasn't leaked for 100 years. It's only leaked for 15. A new roof was put on 2005, so there are some leaks in the roof. That's not a long-term concern. Wooden buildings are great in earthquakes, by the way. I put wooden buildings in Japan now rather than concrete and steel, so that's not a really big issue. Certainly could do some upgrades, but I still want to see it as a train station with other things. Arts community in there as well is great, but I think you've got to maintain that part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. I think I saw Sam.
Yes. Sorry. A little bit of an obstacle course. I'm Sam Brownlee, and I live at 4205 Bird Street in Port Alberni. And looking around this room, what I'm shocked by, where are First Nations? They have a vested interest in what happens with this land. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important before any decisions are made or any RFPs are issued or anything like that, that there is a meeting of the minds between our First Nations and council and the city. That's all.
Thanks, Sam. That's a great comment. Okay. Chris?
My name is Chris Washington. I live at 3968 Shaughnessy Street. I also own two businesses on 3rd Avenue. I am excited about the concept. Nothing specifics, I think, other than we need to maintain our history. I think we should find a way to maintain the train station in whatever form so our history is maintained. But the whole concept excites me. I was born and raised in this community. I've lived elsewhere 2 different times over the course of my 55 years. And I've seen this type of development go in all over the world, frankly. I've been to Calgary, I've been to Duncan, I've been to New York City, I've been to London. It's just awesome what this does for community. And I think when the gentleman spoke earlier about the scale is dependent on the city. So we don't have to worry about this being too big of a scale or an operation for us. And he also spoke about having this not be one little area, but you all know, well, you probably all know that I've been speaking about doing something like this in the Uptown corridor for quite some time. So I don't drive by and see nothing. I see what we can do. I see what we can be. And this kind of start to me is exciting. I am so excited to be up here and to see that this council has got this kind of report put together and that they're thinking about this kind of development for our community. I'm just in awe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Jim?
Jim Del Rio, 2871 First Avenue. You guys should have it memorized by now. You know, you guys got lots of work ahead of you. I've been listening to, you know, and these are all good ideas, but we can't even get 2 farmers markets and a Sunday market and a Wednesday market to all work together. You know, that's the first thing I look at is what do we have now? And we have a lot of stuff, like smaller stuff, but it's all over the place. Nobody's making it. They're all not busy. Get together. Put our egos aside, or put their egos aside, or somebody's ego aside, and work towards a common goal. The idea of cutting off, what's the name of that? Argyle, that's the road. From down there should have been done a long time ago. It should be done now. And that's where all of these markets should be all on the same day. That should all be a pedestrian as far as I'm concerned. You know, in the meantime, use the parking lot at the train station. There's lots of parking there. There's lots of parking down in that area. You know, so I don't agree with, and I'm not against the arts. This lady came up with the arts. If we put something like that in there, they're not going to pay enough money to make it viable. I've noticed like all of those shops down there, the rent is ridiculously low. You know, I mean, I understand, I mean, sometimes it's only a summer thing, but I mean, it is ridiculously low. And if we get an arts council, or like we have the heritage people in there right now, they're not recreating any income for the city. The money would be all going out, there's nothing coming back in. You know, and that's the same thing we've run in with McLean's Mill. It's all money going out, nothing coming back in. So I would really take a hard look at, like, it should be multiple shops. I mean, I've always been to that too. I'd like to see the old, the building on the corner there where the mini store is now. I was hoping, like, I'd like to see about 35 stores in there, small ones, that artisans and stuff like that can afford to pay a little bit of rent and have a spot where you can go in and like have an indoor mall. I think Sherry, you and I discussed that once. Yeah. That's what we need. And this idea of let's start developing it, that's a great one. But let's get what we do have to work together first. You know, like I don't go to any of the farmers markets or nothing anymore because I'm not going to drive all the way out to see the same carrots that are down here. You know, I don't care about the price or nothing, you know, but it's just, it's small town. I grew up in Mission. Mission missed everything. They had a beautiful station, a lot nicer than this one. They did nothing about it but talk about it until somebody burned it down. You know, and now of course West Coast Express is in there and stuff, but Mission, that's why I moved to Alberni. I like it because it reminds me of my own hometown. Small, kind of grow. Mission has done nothing. Not a damn thing, and I've been theirs for 70 years, you know, and they've done nothing. In fact, the same, if you drive down Railway Avenue, the buildings on the back still have the same paint they did when I first noticed what different colors were. They've done nothing to the town. And I don't want to see this town go that same way. You know, and I know there's going to be a lot of nayers. That's change. That's change. That's what we need. So anyways, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Aaron?
Hello, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Aaron Coline, 4860B Beaver Creek Road. Yeah, a little over 2 years ago, I opened Twin City Brewing in Port Alberni, and I have been kind of keeping an eye on opportunities to expand that endeavor. We have had the opportunity to kind of look at just to see what the train station has to offer. I think it was very cool to see the presentation today, and I think I just kind of wanted it to be made known that, you know, we are looking for more space as a brewery. We have been very fortunate with the amount of traffic we have gotten to stop in Port Alberni because of the brewery and because of the way that we are celebrating Port Alberni and letting people see it in a new light. the name Twin City itself, I love the chance to tell people the story. I was just at a beer fest on Saturday with over 6,000 people there, and it was that being the ambassador for my community, I got to talk about Port Alberni and what it has to offer and why you need to stop there the next time you're going to Tofino, because a lot of people are. But anyways, we're in a situation where we have more people that want to experience what we're doing than we have seats for. Space is becoming very tight, and we are obviously looking for a second location that we might be able to use as a tied house. So we are interested and looking, haven't committed to anything, but we are interested in a pub tap house style restaurant with a more fleshed out restaurant side of things. So that is something, you know, this property has stood out to me for that. I think not only preserving the fact that it's a train station, but celebrating it is very much in line with what we do. I am also completely open to seeing the steam train run and even being involved. Ticket sales, having that as part of the business, having it integrated in some way where we can at least, you know, have an opportunity to let people experience that side of things, because like I said, it's a train station. I want to see it celebrated as a train station. But yeah, I just wanted to make that known and thank you for the opportunity to kind of hear what was going on today.
Thank you very much. I think I saw Gordon. Yep, come on forward.
Madam Mayor, if I could jump in while Mr. Blake's coming up. There was a question earlier about First Nations attendance. On our invitation list for this meeting were Hoopachessa and Sashot, both First Nations.
Thank you for confirming that.
My name's Gordon Blake, 5251 Argyle Street. I've lived here longer than most of you have been alive, and no matter how you look at it, a train station is a train station. And I think there is some room in there for some small businesses, but basically it's a train station. And I think we should listen to what this gentleman said about upgrading the building before it falls down. And I think this is the city's responsibility. The Western Vancouver Island Industrial Heritage Society has put a fortune into that building. And we were unceremoniously dumped in favor of the McLean Mill Society, which has done absolutely nothing for the building. And we're still sort of hanging in there. And I'd like to see the city take part in bringing this station up to the level that it should be, and then we can probably find a few small business to put in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol?
Hi, my name is Carol Ann Phillips, and I live at 2310 14th. Just a couple things. I think it was absolutely awesome. I loved all the ideas. I agree with Chris about the street being blocked off. That's just a win-win. And would love to see Aaron down there. We need that kind of thing. Myself, I personally would invest in a business if it was like those little box stores or whatever. My only concern is I would hate to see the city sell it to a developer that down the road could change it into something completely different that we don't want. So I just hope we keep that in mind and that you guys do it yourselves.
Thank you. The gentleman right here.
Hello, my name is Stephen Novick. I'm from 4332 Virginia Road, and big train enthusiast that I am. But I'm originally from Edmonton, and go Calgary. Just kidding. Sorry. I wanted to suggest that if we could not keep the train running because they have a streetcar going across a high-level bridge in Edmonton, that just because you can't put a steam train in there, you know, use other forms of railway transportation. Like I had the streetcar. That's my idea. So.
Thank you very much for that. Penny?
Hello, everybody. Penny Cote, And I own the Heritage Building right across the road from the train station. So 5304 to 5344 and 3074 Kingsway. I have 6 apartments upstairs and 5 businesses on the main floor. The building was started in 1910, completed in 1912. And I've owned the building for about 33 years, 34, something like that. Love the building, love the heritage. And I look at this statement on our walls. So any country worthy of our future should be interested in its past. So I truly believe in that. I work with my sorority group, with the museum on bringing forward funds for school programs to make sure that the community, the youth of the community, actually can come in and see where their heritage is coming from. So the presentation was awesome. It's a dream. I have some questions around the street closure and your flow down to the Harbor Quay. Not so much my building, but going beyond. So I didn't really see how that was going to all come in. It sort of stops a flow coming in. I like that you've identified that the parking lot, there should still be parking there. A pedestrian community is great, but you still have to have parking. You still want people to come into your community and to have access, not have to park up at a mall and take a bus down, because they won't do that, or very few will. I would have liked to have seen more of a projection about inclusion of the Harbor Quay, because I think that's very integral to what's going to happen there. So I think that the scope of this was a little too narrow. There could be more development done down at the Harbor Quay, in my opinion. There is a lot of shops there, and yeah, their rent is really cheap. So I really like the idea of remaining at least part of those trees. I think that it says a lot about our community to actually have that with those big trees. People go through Cathedral Grove, and then that's kind of the next stop with the big trees down at our Harbor Quay. It's quite unique, and that's what makes Port Alberni. You want to preserve those heritage, what makes you so unique, and this is Port Alberni. And it has been a part of Port Alberni. The last train, stagecoach stopped in front of the train station and my building, 1912. And then it was train service. So I know a lot about the history there from owning it for 33 years. And all of the old timers would come by as I was outside painting or sweeping sidewalk. I had a store in the building for a number of years. And met a lot of people and continue to do. So there's a lot of heritage in the Carmore building that could be sort of brought out. PWA started there, first 2 banks, a lot of history. Kim Campbell's grandfather had a dentist office upstairs in our building, and she was the first female prime minister in Canada. So the Carmore building, I have done the reconstruction to earthquake the building so that it is up to code, at least for 10 or so years ago, and continue to maintain that building. And I'm very proud of it being one of the only private-owned heritage buildings, probably the first one of private-owned in Port Alberni. And I like the ideas that are coming forward. I think that the train station should be utilized. I didn't really hear anything about preserving the actual train station as far as being part of the service that connects Port Alberni out to McLean Mill. So I'd like to see maybe some more expansion on that, or hear what plans could be on that, because I think it needs to stay a part of that, because it has this rich history. But I do think that there is room for more expansion, and quite concerned about the road closure. didn't see how you'd manage to move people around. But thank you very much, and progressive thinking. Thanks.
Thank you. Come on forward.
I'm Jean McIntosh, 6680 Desmond Road. Very inspiring presentation, and I really appreciate the architect's obvious understanding and enthusiasm for heritage. The thing that has perturbed me a little bit is the presumption, the basis of the start of all of this, that the train station would be leased out, would be redeveloped, whatever. And I do think it's really important that it maintain in some way its function as a railway station, and I do encourage council to continue to think about the operation of the steam train, because it's exactly what the architect was talking about without acknowledging the steam train, that's an attraction that can bring people synergy with retail, with whatever, and the idea of treating that not just as a building but as an area just allows a much greater synergy. But I do think the steam train can be a really important part of that, and I encourage you to consider that.
Thank you very much. Come on forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Walker, and I'm a co-owner of the Nanoose Creek Campground in beautiful downtown Nanoose, BC. Where I fit in is we have a considerable amount of European and other visitors coming, and they're going to Tofino. Tofino. How many more times do I have to say it? So a lot of them are European. I don't have to tell them about goats on the roof. I don't have to tell them about Cathedral Grove. On the way back, we're convenient just before the ferry's there, so a lot of them come back in, and a lot of them say, I didn't have a reservation, or the campgrounds were $70 a night. There was nothing to do in Tofino, and basically we're on our way back now. We're on our designated route. So I fit in because I'm a volunteer conductor. The last 5 years I'm retired from Canadian Pacific. 5 years ago, your trains were packed. We had 5 cars. Each car handled 30 people per train approximately. Some trains had standing room only on them. So if that's any indication of the draw, when I mentioned the steam train to these tourists at our campground, of course, we'd have the pamphlets, there was a great deal of interest. So from an outsider's perspective, what you need is something to draw these people in. When I came in from Nanoose today, it was a parking lot at Coombs. You'd had to stop and wait for people walking across the street to get them to do their thing there. Matter of fact, I was late for our meeting here when I got here. Cathedral Grove the same way. We were backed up 10 or 15 car lengths while people were pulling in and out. When I get to the visitor center turnoff, everybody's going to Tofino. So that's all I've got to say. If the steam train 4 or 5 years ago was any indication, with 105 or so people on that train, if that's any indication of all what you could have and what you folks need, is something to draw these people in. We're holding open houses now when the cruise ships come in, and a lot of people, including people from Port Alberni now, are going to the train station. I've never been in the train station. And you look around there, you have some fantastic events like your Santa Claus do there, or we're a sellout. We have 2 days, and I'm sure we could sell out for a week. And I mean, we're doing community events and that, and people come in a long distance just to go to that Santa Claus train. You could have a considerable amount of other events to draw people in as well. And I want you to consider that train station as being a part of it, that and the mill. I've noticed now, talking to the tourists in our campground, there's nothing, like their itinerary is already set. So you're going to have to make yourselves more known if you want a portion of this traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pam?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Pam Craig, 6211 Smith Road. My family's been here for many years, And I have a very strong connection to the heritage in this community. The train station is the official designated only heritage building in our community, and I urge you to maintain that designation. I think that it's incumbent on our councillors today to make sure that they maintain control over what happens to that building. I'm not opposed at all to development and changes and increasing attractions to our community, but that building itself needs to be upgraded so that it doesn't get damaged in whatever might happen. But also, I really urge you strongly to maintain control of that building and make sure that it maintains that heritage designation as well as the appearance. And hopefully someday we will be able to return the steam train. I think that too has got to be considered when you're looking at that building and the development in those areas. I was able to speak to a number of the people that came through on the cruise ships, and they were just enthralled by the building and the heritage that we were able to discuss because that building, it caused a lot of conversations just to walk past it. So please, be careful in your thoughts. Make sure you maintain that building as our designated heritage building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any more people here who wish to speak? Come on forward, Sheena.
Sheena Falconer, 10253 Sterling Arm Crescent. So McLean Mill Society president. We would urge council to consider retaining the designation and also control of the site as McLean Mill Society develops their plans for the future. We would urge that the link be maintained, and we're open to other organizations being in there and creating profit centers or attracting visitors and that type of thing. But it is a pretty key component for the trains, and we're pretty hopeful, or more than hopeful, that we can get those trains operating again, because it is a key. I mean, McLean Mill Historic Site is the attraction in Port Alberni, really. And so as we work through all the problems and issues that have developed over the years and get them resolved, then looking toward the future. I mean, when I'm out there, because in 50 years, I want my grandchildren to be riding the train out to McLean Mill. And so I just would urge you to think far ahead in the future as to what that can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yeah, I see a hand in the back. Come on forward.
Bert Simpson, 4460 Wellington Avenue. I work with the Industrial Heritage Society. I think we all saw the pictures of the station, and I'm begging and pleading with the city to please put a new roof on it as soon as possible so that we don't have more water damage this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak? Are we sure? There are people here who haven't spoken. Come on forward.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Pamela Welgan, and unlike many of the people here, I'm at 5199 Pineo Road, by the way. But unlike many of the people in the room, I haven't been here for that long, and my husband and I made a decision to retire in the Alberni Valley, and living here has exceeded our expectations for the most part. And I would say to all of you with the greatest respect that all of the historical elements of the train, which I hope will return to become a steam train rather than a diesel train, by the way, the McLean Mill and the bike trails and the hiking trails, the log train trails, all of those things mean a great deal to us. what I'm particularly concerned about is that there seems to have been just a stop in what's going on with the train and with the mill, and some delay in kind of catalyzing new developments. So what I'm really excited about here today is hearing all the different ideas about potential redevelopment, repurposing, and I don't see any reason why we can't have a number of activities going on, both commercial and historical and cultural and artistic and so on. So thank you very much it's been a very interesting afternoon.
Thank you for coming. We have a few more minutes if anyone else would like to come forward. Okay. Seeing no one wanting to speak for the first time. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say if there was anyone first who wanted to speak for a first time. And seeing, oh, come on forward.
My name is Sherry Stevens, and I live at 5601 Serenga Road, and I've been in Port Alberni for 40 years this year, and my husband was born and raised here. I do not like speaking in public, but anyways, I just want it to be known that we support the train and the Industrial Heritage Society and McLean's Mill 100%. And when you travel the world and people talk about Port Alberni, they ask about that steam train. Even when it only went to the pulp mill and back, people would come here to ride the steam train. So this year, I was really devastated to find out that it's not running, and I'm concerned about the tracks going out to the mill, like they're sitting there wearing out. And, you know, we're gonna lose something for the gain of really nothing, you know. So I just want it down on paper that we support the train and the mill and really hope it gets going next week. Okay, thank you.
Probably not next week. But I would just like to note that although the purpose of this meeting was not about the train and the specifically in the mill, it may appear that council has, it's just stopped, progress has stopped, but we are working on it still. And when we opted to not run the train this year, it was not a permanent closure. So, you might not see work going on, but we are intending to move forward still and get back on track. There we go. That's the easy pun. Come on forward.
Hi, I'm Richard Spencer, 5825 Brown Road. I grew up on the railway. My family bought season passes, and we'd go every Thursday or Friday. Every week I'd go on the train when I was younger. And I've started working with it this past year, helping out, shadowing the conductor. And I just love it, and I love learning about the heritage, especially with the train station. So I'd just love to see it stay open, especially as for the railway. There's obviously tons of different opportunities and ideas you can put in with people going in their small businesses, stuff like that. But I'd just love to see it open as a train station primarily as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak for a first time? Okay, Sheena, do you want to come forward again?
I just wanted to ask what the process is for making decisions so that it's clear to everybody here what next steps are going to be and how the public can provide input and how other people who weren't able to make it today, being summer, can provide input. And also just to echo that although it seems like maybe things have stopped, they definitely haven't stopped for us because we're working our tails off right now creating a plan for upcoming years. So if you could let people know, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we do have a, suggested motion for kind of closing the meeting or for the end of the meeting, I guess. But I'll let the CAO speak to next steps. And then also if people want to give additional input, what the best way to do that is so that all of council can receive it.
Madam Mayor, I might refer to the city clerk for a wiser response. So this is a committee of the whole meeting, so that means the council is not able to make decisions here. you are able to recommend things to council. And so if you choose to recommend something to council, then when you next meet, your next earliest opportunity is July 22nd at a regular meeting, where you could then receive that recommendation and decide where to go next. So it really depends what you want to recommend, if anything, to the next council meeting. And as far as input on this, I'm going to ask the clerk to weigh in on that. If there's a public information process.
Just passing the buck. Actually, I'm not sure if our manager of communications is in the room or still here or not.
Welcome forward, Lisha.
Putting you on the spot, manager of communications, but just talking about public input. Should the public wish to provide some more input to this process?
Absolutely. So there are a number of forums in which the public can provide input. The first being via email, which is cdpa@portalberni.ca. That comes direct to both the clerk and I, and we'd be able to take input that way. You can also send input via Facebook Messenger. And for anyone that missed today's meeting, we do have it on our YouTube channel available, and I'll post that out this afternoon. And then perhaps the CAO and I can talk about next steps with regards to the project and see how we can engage the public in gathering input on the next steps of the project.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just got a text from Bill Collette from the Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce, and he came here with intentions of speaking today, but all of a sudden he became very ill, so he sends his apologies.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. We do have a motion here, but I think the most important thing is that the intent of this meeting was to gather input from the public, and there certainly will be more opportunities to do that. This is a building and an area that we all care a lot about, and I think that's why we're all here. I see many potential uses for this building in adding vibrancy to that area, and I think that a lot of you see some similar issues or some similar opportunities and different ones as well. And it's been fantastic having the opportunity to hear from all of you today. Councillor Soldo, would you like to read the motion, which is just a recommendation to bring this forward to a formal council meeting for more?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I move that the presentation from Will King, Waymark Architect, be provided to the next regular meeting for council for consideration.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. And would you like to move adjournment?
I'll move to adjourn, Madam Mayor.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone, for coming.